Starting. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Story Studio podcast. If you are a regular listener or watcher, you're probably going, what podcast am I on right now? Obviously, I'm not Johnny B. Truant, and you will also not see Sean Platt on this episode.
Best episode ever.
This is not the worst episode ever. My name is Niamh, and of course Bonnie is on as our co-host. We are taking over the show. You might have noticed lately that we've done a lot of episodes where the guys interview a member of the Sterling and Stone studio. So Bonnie's been on talking about stuff. I've been on. We've had some of our other studio members coming out to talk about specific areas that they're really great at. And we realized that we didn't really have the opportunity to talk to the guys about what they're great at because they were hosting all of these episodes. So we decided to jump in, take over the podcast for a couple of weeks so we could interview the guys about those things that they're really talented about.
Oh, well, we've only got 30 minutes, so that's perfect length for the things I'm great at.
Exactly. So we figured we'd give Dave the smallest slot. No, we had a lot of fun tech issues today, which Dave says is because it's the episode about Dave. So that's a kind of a good intro to Dave. So we're going to skip right over something cools and dive into talking to Dave about raising tension. This episode could equally have been about going dark, but we know we've talked to you a lot about that before. So Dave, what we'd like to do is just start off by you telling us a little bit of your background, and then this can be the ultimate Dave episode where people who don't know you at all can come and learn some stuff about you. So just tell us a little bit about your journey into becoming a writer, if you can give us the short version.
The short version. Okay, I started writing. There we go.
Okay, well, what precipitated that?
As a child, writing books and comic books were my escape from miserable school experience and bullying and all that stuff. So I would, hide in the back of class, or instead of going to lunch like a normal person, I would sit in the hallway by myself if none of my friends are around, and I would either read or I would write. And writing became my escape. And basically, I've always wanted to create worlds that offered the same sort of escape that I got from my favorite stuff. And that's the short version of it. That's what I do.
Awesome. And how did your writing relationship with Sean start? Because obviously that's what brought you to self-publishing and to the studio in particular.
I was a reporter for a few years before the economy decided to just implode and my newspaper folded, and I was suddenly without a job, and I just had a kid. So I decided I wanted to I was going to start a sort of a humorous column about being a father and pitch it to a bunch of newspapers. I don't know what I was thinking, but I've always liked writing columns. I did that at the newspaper in addition to real stuff. So I was going to start a blog, put my stuff out there regularly, and eventually, pitch it to the newspapers once I, had a decent amount of, whatever content. So I thought of this cool name, and I was like, no, that won't be as good. I'm going to go, I thought of the name Writer Dad. That's what I was going to go with. But then I thought, I don't know that newspapers or their audience will really care that I'm a writer dad. I should probably do something a little more finely tuned to them and their audience. So I picked something else, which I don't even remember what it was. And this is 3 or 4 weeks past. I'm like, I really want that other name. So I went to go buy it because I had already went to go buy it, and I changed my mind last minute. And it was available the first time. When I went back, it wasn't available. I was like, what asshole took my name? So I was very upset. So I decided to, look it up. I type it in, and Sean's there with his brand new website, and he's writing and stuff. And I was like, what a dick. So immediately I emailed him. I said, hey, asshole, you stole my name. I was being facetious. I really was impressed with everything he was writing, and I just wanted to talk to him. And I had already started, another blog. So I asked to interview him for that one, and we hit it off. I told him, you know, I've written the starts of a lot of stories, never finished any of them. But now that I can hit deadlines, haha, joke there. Now that I can hit deadlines, I'll probably actually finish a book. And he asked to see, you know, something. So I sent him the very beginning of Available Darkness, and just to see what he thought of it. And instead of saying what he thought of it, he decided, oh, I'm going to like collaborate with you on this. And he sent back like an edited version. And I've never wanted to collaborate with anyone before. I'm very, you know, very selfish with my stories. I like mine. I just want to do them. And he like made it, you know, really awesome. I was like, holy shit. So we decided to start writing together, and the rest is history.
And when you first started writing, you weren't self-publishing though, right? You were writing online and just putting your stories up online?
Yeah, we had a website for Collective Inkwell, and we put Available Darkness. We did a serial for that online, and very few readers. We weren't really well known or anything, and usually the people that knew us from our other stuff are like, well, let me know when this is a book. And at the time, I think it was 2008 or whatever, Kindle hadn't yet taken off. But when Kindle did take off, we're like, well, we could actually write a book. And because, you know, publishing to print before Kindle was not exactly your path to success. So, but Kindle completely changed everything in our lives.
Awesome. Okay, so we want to talk a lot about like raising tension and some of the kinds of stories that you write, but you know, for the uninitiated, most of your stories would be considered darker. How did you end up? Yeah, how did you end up gravitating towards darker types of stories?
Well, I always enjoyed horror stories and suspense stories. I mean, I love Stephen King, Dean Koontz, Clive Barker. I love I like the short stories. There were a bunch of Alfred Hitchcock collections that I read, like when I was in middle school and high school, and I loved everything about it. And I don't know why I gravitated towards it. I've always wanted to understand why people do bad shit ever since I was a kid, and I first read about slavery, and I was like, what the hell is this? And my mind is just like, I want to know everything I can know about it to understand why people would do what they do. So I don't know. So I've since realized, I think part of it's to understand other people and, you know, how they tick. And the other part is catharsis for like all the shit that we have to deal with and all the fears we had to deal with. I grew up in a shitty neighborhood, and there were a few scary incidents that kind of left an impact on me. And then, you know, when we moved to the suburbs, I was bullied. So a lot of the stuff is my own fears, you know, turned into fiction. And when I became a parent, like one of my biggest fears, everybody jokes about like the whole children in jeopardy thing. I think if you had read anything I wrote before I had a kid, there was never a child in jeopardy, because that's something I never thought of. And then when I had a kid, I was like, holy shit, that's something that keeps you up. Like, wow, you really cannot protect your child from the world. So for me, a lot of it is just catharsis and offering escape.
Did you ever solve the problem, solve the question? Why do people do bad things?
People are fucking savage animals. There's really nothing more to. I'm still trying to understand. Maybe the day before I die, I'll have some, you know, insight.
What's the happiest thing you've ever written?
What's that?
So, what's the happiest thing you've ever written?
My comics that I did before I was writing, they were sweet and humorous. So yeah, I don't know that I've written any happy books though. I don't know. I mean some of them have happy endings, but they're not like generally like, you know, lighthearted cat solving a mystery sort of stories.
I'm kind of curious.
Okay. Sorry, you go ahead, Bonnie.
Yeah, sorry, to interrupt. I'm actually really curious though, Dave, what was the theme that was in your stories before you had a child? Like before it got replaced by Child in Jeopardy?
Just your basic like monsters or serial killers or stuff, but it was like, you know, the protagonist was usually a guy or a woman. They didn't have kids. They were You know, they were adults doing their adult things, and they're really their only. It's a very sort of self-centered 20-something, I guess. Like the world revolves around you, not your kids, not your family or anything like that. The greatest thing you have to lose is your own life. And when you get a little bit older and you have kids and stuff, you realize, no, that's not the greatest thing you have to lose. So I guess more mature. So the other stories were more immature. They were more like me just, writing shit that scared me.
Do you find it really satisfying when you make things really, really bad for your characters?
Oh, yes. It's weird. It's like Sean and I will be in a meeting and we're like brainstorming a story and like, how can we make this thing worse? And we'll be like batting some ideas back and forth. And all of a sudden Sean will start talking about something. And like my mind just like, it just peeked behind a curtain and saw, well, what if there's a whole school bus of children going into a volcano? That's stupid. But, I just have this like over the top sort of, this is really fucked up. Let's do this. And like when it happens, Sean has remarked that I just look so joyful and happy. So it is weird. And when I'm writing a story, like before I write the story, I'm thinking of the worst shit I could think of. But then once I'm actually in the story, I'm in my characters' heads, and like I'm in love with them. I don't want bad things to happen to them. So it's sort of it's like I want to protect them, but I got to do these things to make it a story. Otherwise, if nothing happens, it's not a story. So it is difficult once I actually know the characters and like them to put them through sheer hell. And sometimes like I thought of killing people and I would change my mind like once I know them, and I have to like really determine, are they going to die or not? So I don't know.
Have you ever gone the other way and like started writing a character and then and then you're like, oh, I definitely need to kill this character off? Yes.
I've killed many characters off that I hadn't intended to. I did just now in the current book I'm writing. There was supposed to be one character that died. That character did not die. Instead, I'm killing two other characters. So usually someone's going to die, though. That's a given.
Have you ever written a book where nobody died?
I'm trying to think. I don't know. I don't know if I have. Maybe a short story. Sean says I don't think so.
Don't think so. Well, like everybody kind of gives you shit for the whole dead baby at Christmas story. But could we talk about that story? Because Sean had me read it and that story haunted me. Like, it did. What you did with the mythology and the fact that you had this character where you couldn't tell if she was being cursed or if she was like being vindictive and doing it. And the fact that you said it from the husband's point of view, so we were always guessing what was going on with a wife, of like, that story still shows up occasionally in my dreams. And it's not the dead baby, it's actually the relationship between the husband and the wife. So could you talk a little bit about just thinking about how you set that story up, about like the sources of tension in a story? Because like the dead baby was there, but I actually don't think it was the main source of tension. I think what was going on with people who are alive was actually the big thing.
I don't even remember most of that story. That was like a story that we were writing, and I don't it's one of those stories that like Sean's like, well, we got to write this story. And I'm like, I don't know, my heart's not in it. And I was trying to make something of it. And I got into the characters. I do not remember the source of tension. So yeah, I don't even remember the name of the damn story. Someday I'll reread it and it'll be new to me. But interestingly, on a side note, the whole dead baby thing, like I said, I had a comic before that was, sweet, and there was, it's a very sort of childish, sort of like Calvin and Hobbes sort of thing, but a little more peanuts, not as much cynicism, just a little bit. But it was a sweet story, and it had a talking penguin and a guy, and the guy got married and he had a kid, and I stunned the fuck out of my audience by having the wife have a miscarriage. And the reaction to that was the most interesting thing ever. Like, some people were shocked. They were like, what the fuck did you just do? Because I think to that point, and my comic was, fairly popular. I had like 4,000 views a day or so. I mean, at the time it was, pretty decent. At the time, like a comic strip like mine, I don't know if anyone had done something like that, and because it wasn't known for that. So I took a sweet, funny comic and decided to introduce death in a very serious way. And it was like weeks of aftermath and exploring the entire story. And people are like, what the hell are you doing? So, but the thing is, and even my wife's like, you should not do this story. But I did it. And the reaction I got from that story, other than people being shocked, I had more people thank me for writing that story, that went through similar things. And I had not gone through that yet at the time. But the way I explored it, they thanked me and said, I went through this, or me and my wife went through this. And that meant so much to me that even though I probably lost some readers, the people that I connected with, that made it more special. And that was a cathartic sort of thing. And I was dealing with death of somebody else in the story. It wasn't a baby or anything, but yeah. So I totally did not answer your question, but
no, but that's actually really fascinating. And I always think it's interesting when you see people dealing with subjects that are really difficult, and they're dealing with it in a type of story where it's not just all angst and darkness, and sometimes it really works and sometimes it doesn't. I'm actually kind of thinking of, I don't know if you saw The End of the Fucking World.
yes.
I laughed so hard through that. That's the first season made me just laugh and laugh and laugh. And the stuff they were dealing with was so horrible. It was just I almost felt bad at the end of the episode that I had laughed so much at all of their suffering. But I think it was a little cathartic.
Yeah, and I think stuff like that, one of my favorite horror movies is The Descent, which is about a group of female friends that get together and go spelunking or exploring caves, and I think North Carolina or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And it's on paper, it's the lamest premise ever. These women go into a cave and they see freaking monsters, and it's gory. It's very gory near the end. But what makes that story is that you believe their friendship so much because you spent the first half of this movie bonding with them, and there's secrets, there's lies, there are things that are raising the tension before a monster ever appears, and it makes it all the more compelling, I feel, in real, when they're in this situation. And then, oh, by the way, there's also fucking monsters. Good luck with that.
That's actually one of the few horror movies I've ever seen. I went because my stepdaughter wanted to go see it. And I was just telling myself, it's okay. It's just going to be a bunch of monsters jumping out of the dark. It'll be fine. It'll be over in 2 hours, right? But it was really fascinating how much scarier it was when the women fought with each other. And because they kept doing things to kind of betray each other in small ways. And the more the external danger rose, the more horrifying it was that they were possibly not going to have each other's backs when the monsters showed up again.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about what you think different sources of tension in fiction are, things like mood, things like the antagonist, how do you kind of manage that balance in your fiction between all the different possible ways of creating tension?
I think most of the time my characters are dealing with external and internal tension. Either the lie they're telling themselves, and they're living life one way, but something's wrong and they need to fix it, or they're in denial and they're just being self-destructive. I write that character a lot. And all the shit that can go wrong with when you have life set up a certain way. And okay, let me think. For instance, Mallory in our book No Justice, she's a woman that lost her child. She's a cop, lost her child, and she's addicted to painkillers, and she's in denial of a lot of her pain. She feels guilty, responsible for the things that happened. Feels like a bad mother. She's divorced now. She can't get close to anybody. Her relationships are very like one night stand, sort of like she will not let anybody in because she's already been hurt. And to raise attention for her, like, well, we have her spiraling out of control, but there's also an element of she catches a case in the first book where there is a girl that's gone missing, and it's from the same person that took her child. So it's very directly involving her, and she needs to do the thing she couldn't do to save her own kid. She needs to now save this child, but she's getting in her own way. Everything that can go wrong is going wrong, internally and externally. So I just pile it on, like, what could make this worse? Okay, let's do it. But it's got to be believable from, all the viewpoints. Like, I just don't have the bad guy just arbitrarily doing something just because it doesn't work for the protagonist. No, he has to have his own reason, and shit's going wrong for him too, but it's sort of a combination and escalation of all the shit that's going wrong for everybody. And like, when things go wrong for him, he has to improvise and he has to do something else. But when he does that, it puts our hero in danger, because now he's like, his back is against the wall. He's like, well, fuck it, I got nothing to lose. I'm going to kill her now and I'm going to make her watch. And it's just like, what will make it worse? Well, I'll figure that out and I'll add it. But there has to be internal, conflict and tension for any of it to work. If somebody's just like perfectly well balanced and happy, it's not a story that I care to write.
So it sounds like you really are building tension around the characters first.
Yes.
Is that, do you have any tips for like somebody who is maybe struggling to write a scene that has a lot of tension, like things that help you actually when you're writing, or when you're struggling, maybe a scene that's falling flat or isn't hitting the right notes? What would you ask other people to do?
I try to get inside both people's heads, because usually there's somebody else's, the tension is with, usually, or themselves. But you get in their head and you figure out, what do they want? Why do they want this? What does the other person want? Why do they want this? What lies are they telling themselves and each other? And how are those lies impacting their situation or the other person? And I like a lot in dialogue to talk around the thing that they both should say, don't want to say. Talk around that, and that causes more complications and misinterpretations and all of that, and it just escalates. But I tend to get in my characters' heads and try to view the world as they see it, even if it's completely wrong. Especially if it's completely wrong. That's a fun character to write usually. And for me, it's always been easy because I've always tried to figure out why people are the way they are. Like, why is I don't know, a meth dealer the way they are? What happened in their life to make them the way they are? What prejudices do they hold? What problems do they have? What could have made their life a little bit different? How do they value life? How do they not value it? Like, I try to think of all the things that led them to where they are, and how we can kind of fuck with that a little.
Are you usually, when you're writing, are you usually in the point of view character's head, or do you actually swap back and forth, like when you've got multiple characters in the scene?
Usually mostly the POV character, unless there's a specific conflict where I need to be present for both of them. And like the bigger conflicts, the bigger scenes, I get into both characters' heads. But typically I try to limit it to one person's POV to kind of, you know, keep it balanced, and to also, like, I don't want to accidentally reveal information that this character's POV I'm in cannot possibly know. So I try to box them in, unless, you know, there's something like, you know, a good exchange of dialogue or something where I really need to be in that other character's head too.
Gotcha. You said a minute ago was kind of interesting. You were talking about relationships as a source of tension. And I'm thinking about, I'm not sure if it's okay to say titles. I'm not sure if this one is out yet.
We can beep it out.
It was the one with the girl, and she meets the friend who's the ghost. And I just thought it was really fascinating how she had the relationships with people at school, and she had the relationships with her mom, but also her relationship with her dad, who was dead, was very present for me in that, in terms of, and it did feel like you kind of were alternating between it, like every relationship, as soon as she like started to kind of catch her feet with one relationship, somebody else will kind of like go off the rails. And that's another story of yours that haunts me, like the scene in the school bathroom where the girls catch up to her. Like, I had a couple of dreams about that one too. Could you talk a little bit about that story in terms of like how you set up the relationships and what you were thinking as you were kind of building all those relationships around the main character?
Yeah, that book is Emily's List. It's probably my personal favorite story I've done. And I wanted to approach, I mean, at its heart, it's a story between a mother and a daughter, that they're both facing difficulties. And I think a lot of times, especially when you're younger, but even in any family situation, sometimes your family is like the hardest person to talk to, and you build resentment for things that may or may not even exist. But everybody is like, you know, they live in their own little bubble, and they can cause things to go bad. And then you have real shit that's actually going bad. So, and my character had severe OCD, which is kind of important to me in the story. That's something I've struggled with all of my life. So I don't know. She was virtually alone. She moved to this town where she had nobody, and she meets somebody that is a potential friend. And I thought, you know, in that situation where you are alone and you have all these things going bad for you, she's bullied, you know, her mother isn't quite there for her, even though her mother does love her. And I wanted to like really stress that in the story, that the things that are wrong between them are not the fault of the mother or her. It's just things that fucking naturally happen. But when she meets this other person, like, there's, you know, she's so desperate for friendship, but what can happen when you're so desperate for friendship that you become friends with somebody that might be bad? Like, what can happen to your life when that happens? And the friend that she meets, without spoiling anything, she's also had some horrible things happen to her, and they identify through those things, and it sets both of them on sort of a destructive path. And I think a lot of times in a situation like that, when you have two lonely people that meet and just nothing is going right, things can go very, very wrong. Like, you think about like school shootings and stuff like that. And a lot of it could probably be solved through communication. And I think communication at the end of the book is kind of what, you know, saves the day, so to speak, because they kind of, they let go of the things that are keeping them from communicating with each other. And I think a lot of times we just build those walls and we build a maze around ourselves, and we force ourselves into this thing that doesn't have to be.
I really loved that about the book, the way that it wasn't just this big fierce battle between the supernatural and the characters, that it was actually it felt so personal, that story, just reading it. Like, even though it's been a long time since I've been in high school, I'm not usually a young adult fan in general, but just that I just connected so deeply with Emily, and what you were talking about with the mom came through so strongly. Like, you could just tell that they were both trying so hard, and yet they still just could not stop fighting with each other. It was really beautiful.
Thank you.
Could you talk a little bit about the difference between a book like Emily's List, where you have one, and you're like really deep in one character's point of view, versus something like Yesterday's Gone or No Justice, where you've got like multiple storylines going? Could you talk a little bit how that's different in terms of how you keep the tension going, and maybe even use the different points of views to manipulate that?
It's a lot easier when you have multiple POVs. And something like Emily's List, that's a standalone story. It's not a series. If it were a series, there probably would be more POVs to kind of, give you a wider range of, characters and kind of get in their heads and stuff. But by its nature, the series work that we do, they have to just have more characters, because if not, it really feels like you're too closed in. And for me, like, the thing I like about, my favorite series is that it explores all the different characters, like Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, Lost, like all of those shows. You spend time getting to know each person, and it makes everything mean more when eventually, something horrible happens. So yeah, I don't remember where the question was going, but I for series work, I like to write, I like to get in as many characters as we can without throwing too many at you, and we don't always succeed at that, but yeah.
Awesome. Well, unfortunately, we only have enough time. We have to wrap it up now. But I want to say thanks so much, Dave, for being a guest.
Thank you.
And it was really fun. Thanks, guys, for letting me and Bonnie take over your show. We are going to continue next week.
I prefer this version of the show.
Next week, we're going to be interviewing Johnny and talking to him about keeping things complex while still being sort of a pantser. So I think it'll be an interesting discussion. Hopefully, then we'll also be joined by Niamh, who will be hosting with us. So thanks so much to everyone who listened, and thanks, Dave, for being a fantastic guest. And we'll see you guys next time on the Story Studio podcast.
Goodbye.
All right. Stop recording.